Welcome to Asia Outlook. I'm Melody, and I'm here to report the top stories from around Asia. Bands and singers from several countries, including the US, UK, Italy, and France, extended their warm support to China, particularly the epicenter of Wuhan.
We wish you all the best of luck during these difficult times and hope to see you all soon.
Yeah, we are thinking of you.
Stay strong.
Take good care.
My thoughts are with everyone affected. Stay strong and take care.
We are together, we are united. Wuhan 加油，中国加油.
We're so sorry to hear about everything that's happening in Wuhan. Sending lots of good vibes your way and to all the medical teams working so hard to fight the virus. Stay strong and remember, love always wins.
Most importantly, I wanted to send you all my support and all my love given the circumstances.
Keep away from the viruses, not from law. Our common enemy is the virus, not Wuhan, not China. So let's work together to fight the virus.
In efforts to fight a locust invasion, reports say Pakistan is likely to purchase insecticides from India, bypassing a trade ban it imposed with New Delhi last year. Islamabad has been working with relevant agencies to curb the impact of locust attacks on agriculture and food security. CGTN's Daniel Khan has more.
According to a preliminary assessment by the Agriculture Department of Sindh and Balochistan provinces, about 80,000 hectares of crop have been damaged, and there have been serious damages to grazing and forest lands. Now, according to the estimates of the Agriculture Department of Balochistan, the locust attack has caused over 4,600 million rupees worth of agriculture losses in the province alone. The affected crop area in Balochistan is around 45,000 hectares and has damaged crops that include wheat, mustard, barley, pulses, onions, and cotton crops, among others. Experts say the most time-critical action now is to effectively eliminate adult locust in the already identified breeding zones to protect crops and livelihoods of poor farmers. Pakistan and the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization have signed 2 agreements to control the locust attack with water management and farming practices that are resilient to climate change. The FAO has signed the Technical Cooperation Program with National Food Security and Research, under which FAO will make $700,000 available to Pakistan for the desert locust emergency measures. But the FAO says that the locust situation in Pakistan is so far under control, and if Pakistan can maintain this situation, it can prevent a bigger disaster in the future. Daniel Khan, CGTN, Islamabad.
WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said there have been 92 cases of human-to-human transmission of the coronavirus in 12 countries outside China. But he added the WHO does not have the data to make meaningful comparisons to the situation in China.
At the moment, we don't have enough data on cases outside China to make a meaningful comparison on the severity of disease or the case fatality rate. We're following up with countries to get more information about what happens about each case and the outcome. However, we have not yet seen the sustained local transmission except in specific circumstances like the Diamond Princess cruise ship.
A chartered flight carrying 106 Hong Kong residents who had been quarantined on the cruise ship Diamond Princess landed at Hong Kong International Airport at around 8:30 a.m. local time on Thursday. They have all tested negative for the COVID-19 in Japan before arriving in Hong Kong. CGTN Zhu Den has more.
The first chartered flight arranged by the Hong Kong government have landed here at Hong Kong International Airport. On board, 106 Hong Kong residents who all tested negative for the coronavirus. For 14 days, they were quarantined on the infamous Diamond Princess cruise ship in Japan. The evacuated passengers will spend the next 2 weeks again under quarantine in Hong Kong. They're being put up in newly built public housing with all the basic necessities of daily living. Earlier, Chief Executive Carrie Lam paid a visit to the location in the Fo-Tan area of Hong Kong. We talked to some of the passengers. They said in the past 10 days, they stayed in their rooms almost 23 hours a day and were scared. It was like living in an infected cage. More than 620 passengers on board the Diamond Princess cruise ship have now tested positive for the coronavirus. Among them, 53 Hong Kong residents. They remain on the ship. Results are still pending for some passengers who have been tested, with more than 350 Hong Kong residents who are still on board the Diamond Princess. Judan, CGTN, Hong Kong.
In Afghanistan, incumbent President Ashraf Ghani has been declared the winner of the presidential election that took place almost 5 months ago. After a bitterly fraught count, the Election Commission says he won a second term with just over 50% of the votes. His opponent, Abdullah, refused to recognize the result, saying he would form his own government. The Taliban also rejected Ghani's victory. They are due to participate in peace talks with the government. Though the Singapore Air Show this year has seen smaller numbers in terms of attendance and exhibitors, what has not changed is the display of incredible aerobatics and stunts. The sounds of jet engines reverberated as aircraft from the Republic of Singapore Air Force and the U.S. Pacific Air Force stunned the crowd with their aerial skills. But the highlight of the show was certainly the People's Liberation Army Air Force aerobatics team, the Bayi. Making their first appearance at the Singapore Air Show, the Bayi left spectators spellbound with their maneuvers in the J-10 fighter jets. Let's take a look. This is Asia Outlook broadcasting from Myanmar International Radio. You can visit our website at miradio.com.mm. You can also listen to our radio programs live on the website. The Nigerian pilot's chief executive sent Chinese people a message of cheer recently, saying he believed that China can defeat COVID-19. And he also thanks China for its Belt and Road projects in African countries. The Nigerian people look forward to building a community with a shared future for mankind. Let's take a listen.
Hello, my name is Dr. Austin Mao. I'm a Nigerian journalist and also the executive editor of a prominent Nigerian newspaper, the Nigerian pilot. We feel sad when we hear about the stories coming out of China as a result of the coronavirus. But we are in solidarity with you, and we believe that the spirit of the Chinese people that have sustained them in the last 5,000 years will enable them to fight this virus to a standstill and bring it to an end. We in Nigeria have a lot of Chinese friends, and we are happy about the involvement of China through the Belt and Road Initiative in so many projects in Nigeria. For instance, the CCECC, which is the China Civil Engineering and Construction Company, is involved in the railway modernization project of the federal government of Nigeria. And they have been doing wonderfully well, not just of their country, but also the interest of the Nigerian people. Nigeria and China have become so close in such a way that we always talk about the developmental strides that China has brought to Nigeria. So my message to the Chinese people this afternoon is, Wuhan, the epicenter of the virus, stay strong. China, stay strong.
Esports has become a billion-dollar industry in Indonesia. The government is beefing up domestic competitions in hopes of developing local athletes and attracting foreign tourists. CGTN's Sukinawa Aluwalia reports from Jakarta.
Richard Permana has been a gamer for nearly 20 years. His passion led him to his career as an esports athlete. In 2006, he established Team NXL, which quickly became one of Indonesia's most celebrated esports team. They virtually compete for big prizes in international sporting events, putting Indonesian athletes on the map.
Lebih terstruktur aja, lebih rapi. The industry has evolved. It is now much more structured. We know how to prepare for competitions better because the government is involved in helping us. During the 2018 Asian Games, the government helped us with funding. The fan base is also growing by the thousands. Parents are starting to encourage and train their kids to become professional gamers.
The popularity of esports also led Steven Arianto to open his first gaming cafe. However, unlike Richard, Steven says the local industry is still in its early stages.
There's still a lot of work to do. I mean, because the World Health Organization say that it's a really addiction is to games become like a drug. So the stigma is still there, and we're trying to improve it.
That is the mindset Eddie Lim is working to change. As the head of Indonesia's Esports Association, Eddie aims to nurture professional gamers and introduce regulations that can help local players to compete internationally.
We are working towards training local players to excel in the international market, because that will help to further develop the local esports industry. People in the country will be more aware of the sport and understand its popularity.
The government is not only focusing on developing the country's local online gaming industry. The tourism ministry is also expecting esports to attract tourists to Indonesia. Esports is a lucrative market that continues to thrive globally. In Indonesia alone, there are 60 million active gamers and an industry that's worth more than $1 billion. Sulkina Aluwalia, CGTN, Jakarta.
2 passengers, both in their 80s, from the coronavirus-stricken Diamond Princess cruise ship has died. In a press briefing, the Japanese Health Ministry said the 2 elderly passengers were removed from the ship last week and passed away at the hospital. This as quarantine procedures on board were heavily criticized by an infectious disease specialist and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. A new report from Japan National Institute of Infectious Disease, however, said the quarantine measures were effective. It showed a clear decline in daily new cases when quarantine was implemented from February 7th. 2 groups of passengers have already departed the ship, while a third left on Friday. A disabled hairdresser in Wuhan the epicenter of the novel coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak, has been contributing in his own way to the fight against the epidemic. Song Jong-kwon, who became disabled in his right leg due to polio at the age of 2, is a hairdresser by trade. After reading a news report that medical staff were cutting their hair as a protective measure, he started volunteering to offer his service on January 25th, the first day of the Spring Festival, 2 days after the city went into a lockdown. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan on Wednesday said a military operation by his forces to push back a Syria government offensive against rebels in northwestern Syria is now, quote, a matter of time, end quote, after talks with Russia failed to halt the assault. Turkish troops have already massed inside the Idlib region and more were heading to the border area, bringing NATO members Turkey and Russia-backed Syria close to the brink of direct confrontation. CGTN Michelle Bar-David has more from Istanbul.
On Wednesday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan made some warnings regarding the latest developments in Syria's Idlib province. He stated that the latest talks between Turkish and Russian officials aiming to find a political solution for Idlib had so far failed and had not met Turkey's demands. Erdogan stated that if the Syrian government's hostilities in Idlib did not stop, Turkey would take action.
In other words, the Idlib offensive is only a matter of time. We will not leave it to the Syrian regime, which does not understand our country's determination, and to those encouraging it.
In response, the Kremlin spokesman stated that if Turkey's military operation would be against terrorist groups in Idlib, it would be in line with Sochi agreements, but added that if it were to be against the Syrian army, it would be the worst-case scenario. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also made a statement on Idlib.
The key agreement on Idlib was to separate the Syrian armed opposition, which cooperates with Turkey, from the terrorists. And the terrorists, according to the agreements regarding Idlib, must not be involved in a ceasefire regime.
Lavrov also claimed that the Syrian armed forces were responding to provocations. Over 800,000 civilians have fled the Syrian government's attacks in Idlib. Thousands are now struggling to survive in areas close to the Turkish border in dire conditions. Ankara is worried a new wave of refugees could create a crisis for Turkey and has repeatedly stated it cannot handle any more. Ankara has been sending reinforcements to Idlib over the last couple of weeks with hundreds of military vehicles and personnel now across the border. I'm Michal Bar-David for CGTN in Istanbul.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has begun a 4-day trip to Pakistan as he appealed for international support for Afghan refugees. After decades of conflict, Afghans have become one of the world's largest refugees diasporas, many of whom are in Pakistan. CGTN Nawida Jabrikla has this report.
For many Afghans, growing up on these dusty plains has been the only life they know. 40 years after millions were forced to flee fighting in the country, Afghanistan's refugee population remains one of the world's largest. More than 1 million still live in neighbouring Pakistan, often in makeshift camps like this one on the outskirts of Islamabad. The city is preparing to host a special UN summit this week to discuss their plight.
I think if there is a comprehensive peace negotiation which really brings about sustainable peace, which all the key stakeholders are striving to achieve in Afghanistan, many Afghan refugees will want to return home.
As peace efforts ramp up between the US and the Taliban, there's hope that some Afghans may finally be able to go home. A week-long ceasefire has been agreed between the two sides, but after more than 18 years of conflict, a final peace deal still seems elusive. And for many refugees born in places like Pakistan, being sent back to a land they barely know raises mixed feelings.
We have nowhere to go because I was born here 32 years ago. Where will we live? Even if peace returns, we cannot go back. Here at least we get a hut to live in. There we cannot even get a hut.
If a truce is made with the Taliban and stability comes to our land, then we can go from here to our country. We want to study there and spend happy, peaceful lives there.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is hoping his 4-day trip to Pakistan can help find a long-term solution to reintegrating Afghans to their homeland. But 4 decades after the crisis first started, many here are worried they won't have much say on where they go next. Nawi Jabakil, CGTN.
This is Asia Aula broadcasting from Myanmar International Radio. On FM, make sure you catch us on 96.1 FM in Yangon, 96.5 in Mandalay, and 96.7 in Naypyidaw. You can also download MI Radio app on both iOS and Android devices for your own convenience. Singapore, until recently, was gearing up for an election year, and its budget was expected to include a slurry of sweeteners and measures to help mitigate the impact of the US-China trade war. But with the outbreak of the coronavirus epidemic, the key focus of the budget this year will be on fiscal relief packages for households and businesses.
Singapore went all out as it announced a range of measures to help businesses and individuals tide over the impact of the coronavirus outbreak. In his budget speech, Singapore's Finance Minister Han Swee Kit said that 4 billion Singapore dollars, or about 2.8 billion US dollars, have been set aside to help firms retain and upskill local workers through cash flow and job support.
Our foremost concern is jobs. We want to help our workers retain their jobs and use any lull period to upgrade their skills and be ready when the upturn comes. I will grant a corporate income tax rebate for year of assessment 2020 at a rate of 25% of tax payable.
5 sectors, including hospitality, tourism, and aviation, which have faced the biggest blow due to travel restrictions, will receive additional support. Licensed hotels, service departments, and MICE venues will receive a property tax rebate of 30%. Full-month rental waiver will be given to National Environment Agency-run hawker centers, and a 15% property tax rebate will also be granted to qualifying commercial properties. Another 1.6 billion Singapore dollars, or 1.1 billion US dollars, have been set aside to help households manage their cost of living. This involves one-time cash payouts, vouchers, and rebates.
They're going to be faced with paying more, say, for their vegetables and daily grocery bill, because supply disruption means that some of the stuff may not be coming through, say, from China in the volume and quantity that they used to, so costs may go up a little bit.
The budget has received a thumbs up from market watchers.
We have a crisis on hand because of the virus outbreak, and it definitely has impacted many businesses. That is being, I suppose, addressed at one point. But at the same time, Singapore government, being very pragmatic, hasn't lost focus of the longer-term theme of the economy itself. Weaning the economy of depending on too much foreign workers itself, upgrading on issue of productivity, helping businesses, in a sense, adapt to the new digital world.
The Singapore government is in a better position than almost any other government in the world to respond to this kind of external shock. And that's because the Singapore government doesn't have any net government debt.
Analysts forecast that if the number of cases stop escalating, Singapore could see a surge in activity in the second half of the year. However, they caution that if the outbreak persists, not only will more fiscal relief measures become imperative, but recession might become a very real possibility for the island nation. Miro Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
Russia is banning Chinese citizens from entering its territory starting Thursday. The measure aims to prevent the spread of the novel coronavirus. CGTN Dan Ashby has more from Moscow.
Russia has confirmed that the ban will affect student visas, tourist visas and business visas, but official trips and government trips will still go ahead. But this is just one part of a whole load of strict measures to try to contain any potential spread of coronavirus in Russia. They have quarantined hundreds of people to make sure that they don't have it. Russia has also closed part of its land border with China and restricted flights to China as well. So a very strict response, that even though 2 Russians have got coronavirus within this territory. So a very small exposure to coronavirus here, but the Russian government taking no chances. Of course, this ban on Chinese nationals coming to Russia will affect businesses. It will affect tourism at a time when Russia is really trying to market itself towards China, trying to attract more Chinese customers. In the last few years, Russia has even lowered VAT on some luxury goods to try to get more Chinese tourists over. So I think Moscow has made this calculation that the public here is worried about coronavirus, and even though it will cost them, they are going to continue with this risk-averse strategy. Dan Ashby, CGTN, Moscow.
China's foreign ministry has accused the United States of being a hacker empire. The statement comes in the wake of the crypto AG scandal. The BBC reported that the CIA has been using the Swiss company encoding devices to spy on over 120 countries for decades. Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhang Xuan said facts have repeatedly shown that the United States is the world's largest monitor in cyberspace. He said his surveillance operations have no respect for international rules. The spokesman called on the United States to give the international community an explanation for this scandal, together with CIA and NSA spying exposed by WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden. Former South Korean President Lee Myung-bak was sentenced on Wednesday to 17 years in jail over a set of corruption charges, including bribery and embezzlement in connection with his brother's auto parts company DAS. The judgment handed down by the Seoul High Court increases in prison term passed by lower court also canceled bails for the 78-year-old. Lee was also ordered to pay a fine of equivalent to $11 million for his conviction of collecting bribes from various sources, including tech giant Samsung. He has described the charges against him as motivated by political revenge. Lee was a president for 5 years and ended his term in 2013. A passenger from the cruise ship MS Westerdam that was allowed to dock in Cambodia has been tested positive for the novel coronavirus. The 83-year-old American woman was stopped in the Malaysian capital Kuala Lumpur on Saturday. Health officials are now scrambling to track down the nearly 140 passengers from the Westerdam who had already left for their destinations on 3 continents. Nearly 1,000 people remain on board the vessel on Cambodia's port city of Sihanoukville. The operator Holland Demokara had previously said none of his passengers or crews were infected. The ship docked in Cambodia after nearly stranded at sea for 2 weeks. It was turned away from Japan, China's Taiwan, Guam, Philippines, and Thailand. Since the onset of the novel coronavirus outbreak in China, students and teachers at the Confucius Institute of Kabul University in Afghanistan have been following the news closely and regularly, worried about a place they hold dear to their hearts. In this video, they express their best wishes to China and the Chinese people.
中国作为邻国，阿富汗永远支持你。中国，我爱你。
China, we are with you.
中国加油！我相信你们一定会克服这个困难。China, we support you. 团结
加油，中国加油，阿富汗与你同在。武汉加油，中国加油。
And that's all we have for today's Asia Outlook on MI Radio. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back next week. Until next time.